as we all know, the SDGs are designed as a universal plan to transform our world and to build the future we want. And they were adopted in 2015 to be achieved by 2030. The SDGs framework includes 17 goals, 169 targets, and 231 unique indicators to be used for measuring progress towards these goals and targets. However, today, in the year 2020, 5 years after the adoption of the SDGs, achieving them or even tracking our progress towards them still remains a challenge. Data that are currently used to track progress on the SDGs, such as censuses, surveys, or administrative records, are scarce, and they are not timely, accurate, or comprehensive enough to inform decisions and guide policies. As a result, only about half of the 231 SDG indicators can be measured globally. For example, Africa is not even on track to achieving 14 of the 17 SDGs. And it can only provide data on 40% of the indicators. But even then, many of those data are outdated. On the other hand, new data sources such as Earth observations, mobile data, or citizen science offer a great potential for monitoring the SDGs by complementing traditional sources of data. So in this session, we will discuss citizen science as a source of data to address some of these challenges on the data gaps and needs. We will talk about the potential and challenges of using citizen science data for monitoring the SDGs and how we can leverage its potential for sustainable development globally. We will provide some concrete examples such as on marine litter and use cases from New Zealand and Ghana. We will also provide recommendations on the next steps, and we will do this from the perspectives of different stakeholders within the SDG data ecosystem, including the national statistical offices, citizen science practitioners and researchers, and the UN agencies. So now let's begin with Stefan. So Stefan is joining us from Austria, like myself. He is the head of the Center for Earth Observation and Citizen Science at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. Stefan is the initiator and driving force behind geowiki.org, a global land cover and land use validation tool that aims to investigate and reduce the uncertainties in global land cover data via citizen science. Stefan was the principal investigator of European Research Council funded Crowdland project and is currently the coordinator of the European Commission Horizon 2020 program funded LandSense and We Observe projects. And Stefan's research interests include Earth observations, citizen science, the SDGs, land use and land cover, ecosystem research, and systems thinking. Over to you, Stefan.
Thank you very much, Dilek. As we've already heard, it is really not cheap to monitor the SDGs. The costs are estimated to be in the order of $50 billion over the reporting period until 2030. And these are extreme and massive costs, especially for the middle and low income countries. This is really a big challenge. If these traditional methods are going to be used, we know we cannot really very well track progress towards the SDGs. Therefore, it is really critical to tap into other data sources which are out there and which are available. And here you can see an overview of this data ecosystem which is out there. It's also taken from a publication we've written in Nature Sustainability on the potential contribution of citizen science to monitor progress towards the SDGs. And as you can see in this graph, there are many different data sources. Commercial data, there is also passive data, so many people are now tracking their sleep with devices. This is massive data which can actually be used and could become available to also understand better progress towards the SDGs. Of course, there is the spatial data infrastructures, and there is government data which even though collected by governments, is still not part of the official statistical reporting process. So there is even work to be done within ministries to make use of existing data. And then the big elephant in the room really is a lot of commercial data is collected constantly as we speak by the biggies, such as the Amazons and the Googles, but it's not really made available for monitoring progress towards the SDGs. And I think there is something we can close. And of course, last but not least, citizen-generated data and citizens' data has massive potential. And as we know now, the ubiquitous devices, such as mobile phones, are everywhere to be found on Earth, not just McDonald's and Coca-Cola, but also mobile phones, which enables massive amounts of data to be collected every day by citizens. So there is massive potential for that. Next slide, please. What we've done is to really look to what degree already citizen science is contributing currently at this moment to monitor the different SDG indicators. And what we found that in particularly in the field of biodiversity, citizens are already making a very big contribution, in particularly when you monitor species. So 90% of the current species monitoring is actually done by citizens. And as we have heard, for example, yesterday in the opening panel discussion, in particular, the insect monitoring in Germany actually has led to some policy implementation in Germany to make sure that the insects are going to be protected as they are, which has then, of course, implications also for food security. So here, as you can see on the slide in green, are those where citizen science make already a contribution. In yellow, you can see where there is potential for citizens to contribute to those SDG indicators. And when you see box around it, it means that this indicator band can be collected by Earth observation and remote sensing. And you also see the overlap between what is green and where there is this box around, which means that citizens science data and Earth observation can complement each other. And this is extremely interesting because for Earth observation, you need input and training data, which means that this training data many times can be contributed by citizens. This is it so far from my opening statement. I'm sure there will be many questions and discussions, so I think I leave it here and I hand over back to Dilek.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Thank you for this great presentation on the data sources for the SDGs and the potential offered by citizen science. Now we can continue with our second panelist, Jillian Campbell. So Jillian is representing the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, based in Canada. She has joined the CBD in 2020, where she is responsible for monitoring of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, including national action planning. Prior to that, she led the methodological work on the SDG indicators under UN Environment Program UNEP's custodianship and coordinated UNEP's work on environment statistics capacity building. In order to improve the compilation of environmental data and the use of environmental data and information for analysis, she has been actively working to elaborate how a digital ecosystem for the environment could be achieved, including through new techniques and data sources, such as citizen science data and satellite data. Before joining UNEP in 2015, she was the program officer and statistician at the UN Economic Social Commission for Asia Pacific, UNESCAP, based in Bangkok, Thailand, and in Suva, Fiji. Over to you, Jillian.
Thank you. You can really go to the next slide. For those of you who heard my talk today, this is a little bit of a recap. And I'm going to step back a little bit from where Stefan is coming from. Can I see that?
Sorry, we're having some echo. Or is that only me?
I'm definitely having a sound problem, but maybe everyone mute, that'll help.
You're all hearing an echo,
So
not just you,
maybe
Dilek.
other speakers that are not speaking can mute their microphones to see if this is improving. Could you please, Stefan, Camden, and mute your microphones? Jillian, please go ahead.
Okay. So in terms of a recap, there are of the slide on the slide that Stefan showed, where we showed what SDGs, citizen science and Earth observation could contribute to. I wanted to take a step back and say that a lot of these don't have data. So for some of the indicators, some of the environmental indicators, but it's a small proportion, as you can see from this slide. You know, for about 32%, we had global data, and for 68%, we don't have enough data to assess global progress. And this decision was, on terms of do we have enough data to assess global progress, was basically, do we have at least a certain percentage of countries in every region? And so you can see that we don't have this level of data for most of the SDG indicators. And there's a very high overlap with the indicators where we don't have data, particularly the ones related to the state of the environment and the people in the environment, and where citizen science can contribute. And so really, I think that what we need to do is to combine citizen science with other sources of information, with Earth observation, so that we can have some sort of approach towards measuring these different indicators. And I also wanted to say on the slide that one of the things that we're trying to do here is not to just have citizen science as its own standalone information that creates the indicator, but how do we really integrate it with the Earth observation data, with data that's maybe already being collected by governments. So even in these top green bars, how do we use citizen science to improve the temporal and spatial frequency of the data? Because even when we do have data, a lot of times we have very infrequent data. It's not updated on a regular or even an annual basis, and we're not able to drill down to the local level. And so if you take an indicator like marine plastics, which Camden is going to talk about, if you have an idea of the overall concentration of marine plastics on beaches for 2015, for example, and then you do it again and you have another estimate in 2022, this is really not going to tell you much. And this is probably all the frequency that a government would want to do sort of benchmarking studies. They wouldn't want to do them all the time because they're very expensive. It costs a lot of money to get to the beaches all over the whole country. You know, you have a whole lot of coastline to cover, and some of these areas are quite remote. And so if you're sending government people out to sort of do a study and to do benchmarking to make this official statistics, then it would be extremely costly and you wouldn't do it very often. And so even if you were going to do that and not just hand over the entire indicator to citizen science, you would still want citizen science to come in to fill in the gaps, you know, to flesh out the rest of the coastline and to have a lot more frequency so that you can get something every year. You can see how the trends are changing and you could develop local interventions. Next slide. So the question then really becomes, how do we do this integration? How do we merge citizen science data with other types of data? How do we bring citizen science data together? How do we build monitoring systems that allow us to measure what matters at all different levels, you know, whether this is the national level or the local level or across different countries where you have an ecosystem that spans borders? And how do we connect this information not only to governments, but to companies and people so that we can change behaviors and hold people accountable? And so this really is the question I think that we have for us moving forward. Of course, you know, we need to continue to upscale the citizen science data that's collected, but I think we need to form partnerships more and more with each other so that we're able to actually make a difference. And as we were saying yesterday, I think that through citizen science associations and through using those as a tool to really build partnerships with government and bringing in the private sector, this is the direction that we need to go. So I will now hand back over to Dilek.
You
We
need to
can't hear you.
unmute, Dilek.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Jillian, for this great presentation. It was very concrete, very nice. So I would like to go ahead with Camden now. So we're going to New Zealand, and we'll hear from Camden Howitt. So let me just go ahead with the next slide. So Camden is co-founder and programs director of multi-award-winning New Zealand NGO Sustainable Coastlines, a founding member of the Aotearoa Plastic Pollution Alliance, and an Edmund Hillary Fellow. Camden is a passionate advocate for our oceans and a driving force behind scaled community solutions in the Pacific region. As co-founder of the NGO, Camden has over 12 years of experience in designing and delivering large-scale community-focused environmental programs. These grassroots actions include coastal cleanup, waterway restoration, community and schools education, capacity development and data collection activities in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands. A regular contributor to national, regional, and global dialogue on marine litter, Camden is passionate about open sourcing and scaling innovative solutions. Working alongside the New Zealand government's Environment, Statistics and Conservation departments, Camden now leads the NGO's groundbreaking new program, Litter Intelligence, that combines community engagement with innovative technology, training citizen scientists to monitor and report on marine litter and report on sustainable development goals, and scale up action to prevent the problem long term. Camden, can you please tell us about litter intelligence? Thank you.
Thank you, Dilek, for the introduction. Next slide, please. So yeah, as Dilek said, we've been working in communities around Aotearoa and New Zealand for a long time, and what we always found did with the ability to input into environmental monitoring that was then affecting their communities. You know, that disconnect between the environmental monitoring and the decision making at a policy level that comes out of the data collected was huge. And so we wanted to connect and use our community engagement work to bring citizens back into that decision-making process. So we started designing in collaboration with our Ministry for the Environment, our National Statistics Office, Statistics New Zealand, and Department of Conservation, a program that would address that major gap and allow communities to then engage in those monitoring programs. We've had support also from Microsoft on the technology side of things, but I can tell you that working with an NSO like Statistics New Zealand from the start, from the design phase of the program, was absolutely critical to the success of this, because it meant there was buy-in from that agency in using the data that was sold from that program. So it was an absolutely critical step in developing this and making sure that it was in fact then used. So Litter Intelligence is now established as a program. It's a nationwide program, and it's a citizen science program. It focuses on communities and providing training, support, and equipment, as well as technology for the long-term and scientifically rigorous collection of beach litter data. So we've started with beach litter data. We're using a localized adaptation to the UNEP IOC marine litter guidelines, and we're about to launch a methodology for freshwater and then also stormwater data collection, also through citizen science programs that will all be housed within the same technology platform. The key is really engaging citizens again in that broader solution and that broader storytelling around how waste does not know the borders between different boundaries in the environment. Litter Intelligence is now New Zealand's first national litter database, and it covers 167 beaches and counting around the country, one now in Samoa and the Pacific Islands. And those surveys are delivered every 3 months. So building on what Jillian said, that frequency of surveying and the amount of different sites we can set up by engaging those communities is just huge. That scale is massive. And so we've had over 500 surveys to date come in on that. Behind the program is also a big, powerful technology platform, which allows showing those trends, understanding comparisons, filtering data, and also downloading the raw data alongside with all the data dictionaries and QA, QCs that anyone needs that might want to drill into that data rigor. Alongside that, there's an education program, which I won't get into now, but if we jump into the next slide, I can talk to a few of the citizen science successes that we've had so far, because in collaboration with that NSO, the key was really being able to use that data for official reporting. And so it started in 2018 when the plastic bag ban was announced here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Our very first data from the program, which had just begun at that stage, was used in consultation documents for that, which is a big win for citizen scientists. We had a voluntary national review of the SDGs was produced by New Zealand's government in July 2019. Our program is featured in that. So this all gives wind to that citizen science effort, and it really engages those citizen scientists knowing that that data can work and inform at that high level. The document on the left there, Our Marine Environment 2019, was our probably largest milestone for citizen science data in the country. Really, in October 2019, that came out, and that was the first time that our government had been willing to use citizen science collected data to report in their official environmental reporting series. It was also the first time that marine litter data had officially been reported by New Zealand. So a big win. Outside of that, was featured in Dilek and others, Jillian as well, paper mapping citizen science contributions to the UN Sustainable Development Goals recently. And on the right, I've got one of the sort of more fun wins that have come out of this, where Sony PlayStation contacted us to feature the citizen science program and the data from that and the beaches from that program in a new game called Pick Up Quick, which features the litter data and allows more communities that may not have been able to engage on the ground with that data to interact with it in a really, really fun way. So just all different ways, I suppose, to bring citizens in charge of and connect with the environmental issues that affect them and put that up to the highest level with government reporting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camden, and not only for your presentation, but also this amazing work you're leading. Now, we're going to the US to Anne. Anne Bowser is the Director of Innovation at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, a quasi-government think tank in Washington, D.C. The Wilson Center has a decade of experience working in open science, including through community development and policy activities, strategic research and analysis, and work on supporting technological infrastructure. For example, the Earth Challenge 2020 initiative looks across 6 research areas to make existing citizen science data more open and fair through use of tools like data standards and open APIs. One goal of the Earth Challenge 2020 is to bring together these disparate citizen science data sources to better enable monitoring against the SDGs, particularly around SDG indicator 1411B, which explores the extent of marine plastic pollution. So over to you, Anne.
Hi, good morning, and thank you, Dilek. So in thinking about what I wanted to bring to this panel, understanding that we had Camden here to give a really tight, specific case study into plastics pollution, that is awesome. I loved hearing that. Thank you so much. I wanted to take a step back and reflect on some of our broader projects, organizing, including but not limiting to support the Sustainable Development Goals. So starting in 2015 at an EXA event, actually, the General Assembly, which I believe that year was in Barcelona, a few colleagues from the Wilson Center met with a number of citizen science projects that were engaged in citizen science for the purpose of mosquito vector monitoring. At the time, they weren't sharing information effectively or meeting to disseminate best practices. And this was kind of a gap that everybody was realizing during coffee breaks and informal sessions. So together with the European Citizen Science Association and with support from UN Environment Program, we launched Global Mosquito Alert as a common open set of protocols and a toolkit that seeks to augment global monitoring needs and capabilities with complementary local efforts. And one way that we do this is through a focus on data interoperability. So the projects that we work with recognize that there are at least 4 primary methodologies for studying mosquito vector disease. These include adult species presence absence, bites and nuisance, larvae and breeding ground, and biodiversity specimen and eDNA. There are other methodologies emerging, but at the time there were at least a couple projects that were looking at these 4 methodologies and protocols for doing this type of work. So within the consortium, we co-created what we call 4 pillars, or specific guidelines for how to monitor within each of these 4 areas, as well as paying attention to cross-cutting issues like ethical concerns, and also how to work with mosquito control agencies, since we have a slightly different audience for global mosquito alert work than a lot of the environmental citizen science projects that many of you may be familiar with. Another thing that this consortium has done really effectively has shared technologies. So Mosquito Alert is an app that was initially developed in Catalonia. And by open sourcing it, this group has actually enabled partners to stand up versions of Mosquito Alert in places like Puerto Rico and Hong Kong, including customizing languages, and then also augmenting globally relevant protocols to meet local monitoring needs, and therefore have an impact and help scale beyond the goal of the initial endeavor. Next slide, please. Oh, and this is directly relevant to SDG 3, bringing it back to the SDGs, but then also touches on SDGs 6, 13, and probably a few others as well. So in her introductory remarks, Jillian mentioned our participation in the Earth Challenge 2020 initiative. This is being spearheaded by the Wilson Center, along with Earth Day Network, the US Department of State, and many, many other partners. And it has 2 primary goals. The one that's probably most directly relevant to the discussion today is tackling open data up front. And then the second is mobilizing people and linking citizen science data collection more concretely to policy action. In terms of the open data aspects, one of our partners is the Open Geospatial Consortium, and we've been working with a number of people through OGC channels, as well as the We Observe Community of Practice framework, to understand different pathways towards data standardization and interoperability through OGC standards. And what we're doing for Earth Challenge 2020 in plastics is taking information from 3 citizen science projects: NOAA's Marine Debris Monitoring and Assessment Project, the European Environment Agency's Marine Litter Watch, and then a data aggregator, Ocean Conservancy's TIDES, and using open standards as a baseline for combining information from those 3 data sources into one larger data set. It's actually not quite that easy. In the case of plastics, for example, there's also the issue of taxonomies for categorizing marine debris. Camden was talking about his data dictionaries, and I was a little bit jealous because none of the projects that we're working with had one of those. So there was a lot of back and forth with all 3 of them to understand specifically how they were classifying the plastic pollution that they were working with. And then one more note on the data integration piece. As with Global Mosquito Alert, we recognized very early on that there were a lot of different methodologies or protocols for monitoring plastic pollution. And the one that we wanted to focus on was understanding structured monitoring campaigns, traditionally reported on after beach cleanup events. So what we did is created this map, which takes this global data set from 3 sources and allows people to click on any country to see the top 10 types of plastic pollution that have been reported through citizen science approaches. This is data from 2015 to 2019, so we hope that it illustrates a decent baseline. And then from this initial effort, we've worked with a consortium of partners, including the UN Environment Program and IBM, to actually transform this into an estimate of number of pieces of plastics per square kilometer, which is the metric that is required to report progress towards SDG 1411. So I know I've gone over my allotted time, but a couple of closing remarks. What did we learn from this process? First, people are acutely aware of interdependencies between the different SDGs. As soon as we talk about our role as a data aggregator, especially related to 1411, people say, well, that's great for plastics and citizen science, but we really need to understand this environmental data as well, including information, as Stefan and others have mentioned, coming from other sources such as Earth observations. 2, bandwidth and capacity are extremely limited. I go to some talks now about motivating citizen science volunteers because I feel like we have similar challenges in terms of working with people who have very limited time even to meet the research goals of a particular project, let alone to document their data, create data dictionaries. There are a lot of conversations about equality and equity in citizen science and participation, and this is really hard to do in all of the under-resourced projects that we're working with, and this is true on the organization level as well. And then lastly, we've noticed that there's a really interesting market for data aggregation, which definitely didn't seem to be the case a couple of years ago. So I guess that's a really encouraging development. I think the SDGs are driving a lot of it. Advances in machine learning are as well. And this is an opportunity for the citizen science community to continue to organize and come together and exert a really strong governance structure for controlling their own data so that we don't just have people from some of the tech companies that Stefan mentioned in his opening remarks coming in and playing that role outside of any partnership agreements.
Thank you so much, Anne, for this great work. So let's keep up. Actually, our final speaker was supposed to be Omar Saidu, from the Ghana Statistical Service, but he has been experiencing huge internet problems and he won't be able to join us today, even though he sent his slides a week before or even before that. So he kindly asked me to introduce some of the work that we're doing in Ghana together with the Ghana Statistical Service. So I will briefly talk about that, but first I would still like to introduce Omar, because we're working in many projects together and he has been contributing to this session. So Omar is a social statistician with over 20 years combined experience in data collection, data analysis, and technical report writing. He is a statistics instructor, a fellow of the sampling program for survey statisticians, and a member of the interagency expert group on SDG indicators, IAEG SDGs, that is responsible for developing the SDG indicators and methodologies. Omar coordinates data for monitoring the SDGs in Ghana and currently championing data innovation, multi-stakeholder approach to data production and utilization, and the building of robust administrative data systems. He's not only passionate about strengthening the entire data ecosystem, but also the uptake of evidence in decision-making. So I will just take the liberty to pass the first slides because I'm not really familiar with this, but I will just very briefly talk about what we are doing in Ghana. So as part of the paper that I posted in the chat before, that is on, and Stefan and Camden were mentioning, on mapping citizen science contributions to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You will find it in the chat, the link to the paper. We wanted to pilot some of the results that came out of this research. So we really wanted to work with the National Statistical Office to really see how these results could work in reality. So we approached Ghana Statistical Service and Omar from our relationships from before through the IAEG SDGs, and we asked them what their data gaps and needs are. And they identified these particular 3 indicators as their priority areas and as areas where they have no data. So we discussed these options, and we brought different partners in, such as the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, Thematic Research Network on Data and Statistics, and FAO, and UNEP, and CBD, and many others, led by IAZA, to explore how we could help close the
I think we lost Dilek now. Is that right? So hopefully she will come back very soon. Sorry, everybody. I think we have to just wait a bit. I would suggest she's coming back.
I have no idea what happened. So sorry about this. So I will just start sharing my screen again. I don't know how much of the things that I was talking about you heard, but I was basically telling about we identified 3 indicators in Ghana that they have that they have identified as priority areas within the SDG indicator framework. These are the indicators that are related, a few indicators that are related to actually ecosystem health, and indicator 1542 on mountain green cover index under FAO's custodianship, and the plastic debris density, actually marine litter indicator under UNEP's custodianship. So we are now intensifying our dialogues with the beach cleanup organizations or groups that are organizing these campaigns in Ghana, in order to understand the possibilities of using UNEPs or the global methodology for monitoring marine litter indicator and implement these results there. So this is at the very early stages of the project still, because before we were particularly focusing on other indicator that was under FAO's custodianship, and we will now see, and hopefully maybe in another conference sometime soon, we will be able to report on the results of that project. So I think with that, this is more or less what I wanted to say about our work in Ghana. So I would like to open now the floor for questions. If there are any questions that that the audience would like to ask, so please go ahead. So the Q&A part of our session is now open. But in the meantime, maybe I can ask a few questions to our panelists. So maybe we can start with Stefan. So Stefan, would you like to tell us a little bit about what kind of tools do you think there are available that could be used or upscaled for SDG monitoring efforts?
Yeah, sure. I can try. There are, I think, many tools out there. There are tools which are not techie tools. They exist, but there is, of course, also a lot of tools which are embedded in mobile phones, such as apps, which allow everybody basically to contribute and to monitor. And the landscape of those tools is very wide. I mean, we've seen it in the biodiversity monitoring community. For example, iNaturalist, eBird, they're very successful biodiversity collection tools, which are already contributing, as we've heard, to the SDG monitoring process. But there is lots of scope for many other mobile-based tools to empower citizens in this kind of process and in also driving policy. And we have also at YASA designed some tools, in particularly in the field of land cover monitoring. So there is one tool, it's called PhotoQuest Go. We've run that initially in Austria on monitoring land cover and land use. Can also be used for habitat monitoring. And we have then extended that for the whole of Europe, called PhotoQuest Go Europe, and have shown that the actual data collected by citizens is, when compared to the official land use area frame sample done in Europe, 90% overlap for specific categories, such as those classes which can be observed by citizens easily: maize, sunflower, those crops which are above, of course, forests, water, and so forth. Then there are some categories where citizens have more problems and would need more education to learn that. But we have also embedded that in our tools with near real feedback, where we observe when the observations actually come in, and then tell people near real time why maybe their observation, when we match it to the picture which is coming in, is incorrect, and what they could then do to improve. So we've embedded those kind of near real-time tools, and we've also designed one tool for monitoring the impact of disasters, doing some impact assessment of damage assessment, within the picture pile tool, so that can be used anywhere by anybody at any place. This is also something we have embedded in the Earth Challenge, which was mentioned by Ann Bowser, where we do observations of crops through this picture pile tool, where people are just asked, and this is also fun, and we have some gamification embedded in that. What do you see on that picture? And that information that can then be used for training Earth observation data to improve crop mapping. And that is a real big challenge for global food security applications, for a lot of countries to make decisions on importing or exporting crops. So having a good crop map, country specific every year, or even seasonal every season, is critical. Sorry, this was a bit of an extended answer I gave you, but I just wanted to really go into detail to really show all these different opportunities which are out there. Yeah.
Thank you, Stefan, for the comprehensive answer, and this was very useful. And I would like to ask other speakers if they have any comments or ideas about the tools that could be upscaled for SDG monitoring, particularly if they're aware of any of that. If not, I can go ahead with the questions from the audience. So I see that Andre has a question. Do you have any thoughts on possible political resistance to use citizen science data for the SDGs, as it can have serious consequences for member states? What challenges do you see there, or experience you might have had already? Would any of you like to come in to answer this? Jillian, please go ahead.
So I mean, I haven't seen this. I think that because of the fact that the SDGs are run by the National Statistical Offices, and National Statistical Offices in general are expected to be an autonomous part of the government ministries, so that they can be unbiased in the statistics that they present. There are occasional exceptions to this, but I don't think globally there's many. I do believe that most national statistical offices, almost all national statistical offices, really are trying to do their best to present unbiased statistics. And so the obstacle that I have seen has not been political. It really is more that because of the fact that these NSOs are very protective, and because of the fact that they really are trying to present unbiased statistics, they actually are worried about working with others, and they're nervous that any partnership that they form with citizens or with the private sector could impact their reputation, could make them appear to be biased, and especially if they don't have control of the data, if they don't have control of how everything is done, people get a little bit nervous. And so I think what Camden was highlighting about making sure that you work with the NSO from the beginning and work with Ministry of Environment. And then, you know, what I was saying also, it's really about forming these partnerships and having citizen science organizations aligned so that they can come and meet with the government. Because I do think that, you know, only through sort of having these dialogues and having partnership can we really overcome this. And this is, again, what I think Omar was going to say, and was highlighting also, is that we need to do this together.
Thank you, Jillian. Camden, about because you're quite experienced in this, would you like to come in and comment on this?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just to back up what Jillian said, it's all about partnerships, and it's all about partnerships at the right time. So it's about starting those partnerships early before sort of presenting a fait accompli and expecting that to get over the line with agencies that typically are very, very conservative for the necessary reasons of, you know, staying independent, for maintaining their credibility. I think there's probably some internal politics that the sensitivities to in terms of being conservative. Potentially people in certain jobs that are scared that they might lose theirs if quality drops. But that equality was the huge, was the most important pillar really for us with working with the NSO. And as long as we could, from the very beginning, from the outset, prove that there would be rigor behind the program as a citizen science program, the right documentation and the right QAs and QCs were in place, then that really to cover that off from the NSO's perspective. And because those conversations have been had with transparency and throughout the design phase and documented throughout the design phase, those issues have been resolved, and it's a great working relationship that we have at this end.
Sounds great. Thank you. If Anne or Stefan, would you like to come in, or shall we go ahead with the next question if you have nothing to add? So
I've just sorry, just to mention something. I've just seen one question directly addressed to me. Maybe if it's okay, I to answer that, Dilek. Is that okay?
Let me just go ahead. We will come back to that, okay?
Okay.
We will definitely have time for that. So another question is from Aleta. The topic of matching citizen science monitoring with official government monitoring is very topical. How do we do this? By better aligning designs of surveys, by better data integration tools or joint standards? The main issue is how citizen science data can be fit for purpose, need to fit government reporting duties in order to really be really relevant for policymaking. What are your suggestions on that? Maybe also in terms of like guidelines of some sort to citizen science practitioners on how to achieve this.
I can speak to that one briefly. I know that I've covered a little bit already, but I think that in terms of better data integration tools, I think that would be useful. But in some ways, the people that are sitting in the NSOs are after, you know, your download of raw data that they can really run through and make sure it's as credible as they need it to be, and really run it through whatever programs they need. We've built, you know, significant technology behind what we do, but in the end, it feels that the people that need to access that data and do all of their controls on it need it in the most raw and transparent and open format possible. So I think whatever gets designed in these contexts needs to keep open and transparency right at the forefront, while maintaining the privacy and security type things that necessarily need to protect the rights and security and privacy of those citizen scientists. Because Jillian, I think I talked with you about this at UNEO, you know, when environmental monitoring happens in the field and that data is open and can be exposed to others, that then perhaps can put communities at risk. And so there are issues, well, I suppose limitations to how open we can be, but I suppose integrating the data in a way that can be used in a raw format by that NSO is really, really important, and that's what we've been asked to do.
Thank you so much, Camden. Any other views from any other speakers?
Yeah, I'll come in. So first of all, I thought it was interesting that Aleta asked this question, because I think she's actually one of the experts that I would expect to answer it. But a couple observations from my perspective. So working within a group of US-based federal agencies that are looking at integrating citizen science monitoring and research with official or government monitoring, I see a couple trends. One of them is, as others have articulated, the value of partnership. So I think the case that Camden outlined is one of the ideal ones, where you have a long-term project that's working really closely with authorities. And we see that a lot on the US front too. If you go to a meeting or talk to a specific agency, a lot of the times they will have, you know, 1, 2, or 3 citizen science projects that they mention again and again. And the reason is that those projects are aligned with their agency mission, but they've also built the personal relationships over time with those people, so that they've been able to invest their own time as an authority in really understanding the practices for data quality, ranging from training volunteers to data validation strategies, and then also really understanding key components of the data. I would also echo what Camden said about presentation. There's this litmus test where citizen science data has to look or present like the types of information that authorities are expecting to see. Again, this is just coming from the US-based context. Something I really like about the OGC standard that I mentioned earlier is it includes a lot of opportunities for documenting things like information on data quality and data use license, and then other aspects associated with the process of bringing together citizen science data, presenting potential data users with that information is really helpful for allowing them to evaluate the fitness for purpose or fitness for use of various data sets.
Thank you so much, Anne. I see another question from Igno, and I already posted an answer to this. So please make sure, this is the paper that we recently published in Journal Sustainability Science, and there's a supplementary table in the paper that you can find all the other citizen science projects that could contribute to the monitoring of the SDGs or that are already contributing to the monitoring of the SDGs. This is the short answer. I hope that clarifies that. So now we're going to Stefan's question particularly, or the question to Stefan. Are all the strategies that you are mentioning based on citizen science where citizens act as monitors, or have you participated with projects where citizens have had other forms of engagement in the projects? Was any distinction made in the framework you presented regarding the role of citizens and the outcome reach of these projects?
Yes, so if you address it specifically to the work we've been doing at YASA, most of the work we've been doing indeed was more on the side where citizens were asked to collect data more in a kind of fun and game setting to collect data and to contribute. But we have also had some activities specifically with the GeoWiki tool where we opened up the paper we were then writing, where we made the people contributing actively as power users to become co-authors of the paper. And interestingly, some volunteers have made substantial contributions to the writing of this and made suggestions to improve the scientific papers. So we have also involved citizens in this scientific kind of process, and I think this is something where we want to also move more in the future, and this relates also to the partnerships which Anne has mentioned. I think it is very important to understand the end user needs, but also what we found is that, for example, in the activities we've done on land use, on land cover monitoring, the European Environmental Agency got extremely interested because in the traditional survey, some characteristics of land use are just simply not captured, and there is additional value. There is the complementarity of citizens, and if the citizens are concerned, and this is always when citizens have more an active and empowering role to play, when they are concerned about something, then it's not only the monitoring, but it's the kind of empowerment and potentially also the political and the policy influence that the citizens can then do, for example, in the field of biodiversity or intensity of pasture management in the Alps of Austria. As one example, there's very little information on which areas are worth to focus on and to potentially protect more. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stefan. So I see that there's a question from Rachel, and that got also liked from other participants. So has thought been given yet to how citizen science could be integrated into whatever replaces the SDGs post 2030 from the start? Jillian, would you like to comment on that?
Sure. My impression, if you look at the MDGs, which was the predecessor to the SDGs, the MDG indicators in general were maintained. And the MDG indicators also, similarly to what we're seeing now for the SDGs, did result in a massive investment in compiling statistics related to those MDG indicators. And so, of course, Anne was mentioning that the SDGs are sort of serving as an impetus for right now doing this work and bringing the citizen science into the specific indicators that are in the SDGs. And so I think that this will probably repeat itself next time. My hope is that, you know, the work that's been going on the indicators for the last 5 years of the SDG framework, that this will continue. I'm not sure if the SDGs would maintain its current form where you have all these so many indicators as opposed to trying to integrate them into some sort of indices where we're having less numbers but still the same sort of information that's feeding in. You know, you could think of a GDP type of indicator. I think also there are some additional monitoring frameworks that hopefully will become more mainstream. So right now in the UN Biodiversity Convention, we are looking to create the Global Biodiversity Framework, monitoring framework. And what you see in the SDGs, if you remember the slide that I showed, is that there's not very many state of the environment indicators in the SDGs. There's only 11, and they don't really capture biodiversity very well. They don't capture extent of corals. They don't capture much on ecosystem health or the interaction between ecosystems and people. And so this is what we're trying to bring into the Global Biodiversity Framework. And we have a set of indicators, a small set of headline indicators that hopefully will make their way over to the SDG, successor. Similarly, there's the chemicals and waste work that's going on. This is also weak in the SDGs. There's lots of different types of pollution that are not well captured in the SDGs. And so there's work right now to develop a chemicals framework, a global chemicals framework. So, and the World Health Organization is also developing some additional indicators. So I think there's a lot of different indicator work going on that was not ready for inclusion in something like the SDGs in the past, but could be in the future. And so my hope is that this will kind of all come together in whatever happens after the SDGs. I mean, we'll have to see what it is, but maybe also in a more succinct way. So I would say, in conclusion to this, how do you get how do we increase citizen science in the SDGs? It is sort of looking where these other indicators are being developed that are likely to be included in the future. This is what we're doing with the biodiversity framework, but I think there's a lot of other aspects. What's the SDGs? Where are the SDGs lacking, and what's likely to be included in the future? And then work with those, because the SDGs in general tried to identify indicators that were already able to move forward. And so the SDGs was not actually just looking for any indicator under the sun. It was feasibility was a main component of how it was made. And so if we can advance certain indicators now, then those will be feasible in 2030. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jillian. I see that there are so many great questions coming in the chat, but I'm very sorry that we have only very limited time to be able to answer all of them. So, I think I would like to, before we close this session, I would like to give a very quick summary about the key messages of this session today. So we discussed that citizen science offers a great potential for monitoring the SDGs by complementing the traditional sources of data, as Stefan highlighted. And in order to realize this potential, we need this enabling environment that we have been discussing also yesterday during this conference that facilitates the dialogue between these key stakeholders on the topic, and this should be enabled. These key stakeholders would include the citizen science practitioners, researchers, national statistical offices, and other government officials, and NGOs and custodian agencies. And this is based on the experiences that particularly mentioned by Camden and Jillian, and also particularly in terms of, if we think about the marine leader indicator, the experiences that Jillian had also with the experiences from Earth Challenge on marine leader. So, but this enabling environment also requires a little bit effective supportive legal frameworks, financial means, but we will not be able to get into details on that. So I would like to end this session by saying that citizen science does not only provide the data to fill the data gaps within the SDG indicator framework, but it could also help mobilizing action and raising awareness that we didn't really touch on this session, but there will be another session from We Observe that will deep dive into this topic today. And I would just want to bring this We Observe SDGs and citizen science community of practice. If you are interested in discussing these issues and many issues around the SDGs and citizen science, and you can register for this SDGs COP in short, as shown in the slide. So I would like to close the session by thanking all our panelists and the audience for the lively discussions and for making this a great session for all of us. And of course, a big thank you to the conference organizers for their great support throughout and before the session. So feel free to reach out to us for any of the questions you still have and comments you want to make at any time. Thank you so much. Bye.